Hello and welcome to the Supply Chain Digital Show right here on LinkedIn. My name is Scott Birch and I'm delighted to be joined today by Supply Chain Editor-in-Chief Sean Ashcroft and Procurement Magazine Editor Georgia Wilson. Sean and Georgia, yes, by the power of the internet, we have you both here. How are you both doing today?
Very well, thank you, Scott.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Okay, good. And regular viewers may notice that Helen Adams is not joining us today. That's because it is her birthday. And as a result, we've allowed her a day off for her birthday. So happy birthday to her. Now, as you know, regular viewers, every 2 weeks, we bring you the news, insight and talking points from the fast evolving, fast moving, headline grabbing world of supply chain. And of course, procurement as well. Mustn't forget procurement. This show isn't just about us, though, and our views. We want to give you, our valued followers, a chance to have your say. So on your screen, if you're watching us live, you should see a supply chain digital poll, and you can also post your comments or any questions that you have throughout the show, or even just come and say hello. Tell us where in the world you're watching from today. We'd love to hear from you. So please do get involved. So talking of that poll, Sean, what's the question that we're asking everybody today?
Yes, Scott, the question is, what is the biggest threat to today's supply chains? And the options are inflation, COVID-19, geopolitical uncertainty, and labor shortages.
Okay, Sean, I see what you've done there, actually. We were going to specifically mention some geopolitical uncertainty because that's obviously a dominating story right now. But I'm sure we'll come on to that later. I mean, all of these things obviously have long-term ongoing impact on the supply chain and indeed the wider world. But it'd be really interesting to see what our audience are thinking right now.
Certainly will.
In these worrying times, I think it's fair to say that. I think we briefly saw the poll up on screen then. Are we going to see that again? Just in case anyone was it. There we go. So there you go. There are the various options. Now you can have your say by going to our LinkedIn page, which you may well be on now, and having your vote. Please do go and do that soon. We will be having the results of that poll at the end of the show. Also later on, we're going to have a special guest with us today, and that's Dawn Tyora. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Dawn. And she is president and CEO of the Sourcing Industry Group, the largest global association for sourcing, procurement and risk professionals. Dawn will be telling us a little bit about the thought leadership and training that SIG is providing its members, many of whom are Fortune 500 companies. So stay tuned for that. But first, let's take a look at some of the latest news. Now, excuse me, everybody, if you do hear me barking away and clearing my throat, it's because we did have a live event last week, and my voice is a little bit croaky from all the hosting of those events. But we'll be telling you more about the live events later. So, Sean, back to the news. What's grabbed your attention recently when it comes to supply chain?
Yes, Scott, I did a story last week that I thought was a real eye-opener. It's about how firms who are looking to mitigate against supply disruption by building up masses of inventory are actually opening themselves up to cybersecurity risks, because what they do in order to build inventory is to onboard more suppliers, usually in quite a short space of time. And this doesn't always leave them the opportunity to be meticulous about how they vet these new suppliers. And given that the supply chain is the most vulnerable part of an operation in terms of cybersecurity risk, this can open them up to computer hackers. And the really quite worrying thing really is that the companies who are most at risk from this are manufacturers of medical devices, because of course these devices can mean the difference between life and death. And so the makers of them never want to run out. So they will do anything to make sure they've always got inventory. So it's just seems to be an endless series of firefighting for companies in seeking to resolve one problem, supply disruption, other problems are just springing up.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Like you say, it's almost the necessity of having to secure that supply means that some firms could be not taking shortcuts, but out of necessity having to cut a few corners, or maybe not be as thorough in their due diligence as they might normally be, because
Exactly.
of the pressure of time and supply, as you said. Okay, that's really interesting. Did you speak to anybody about that story? Did we?
Yes, I did. It's a chap called Guy Gillam, who is a head of product marketing for a cybersecurity specialist called Cybellum.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So you can go to our websites, of course, and catch up any of these stories. Plus, if you go to our websites, you can also find our latest issues, and we'll be talking more about those in a minute. But another story, Sean, what else have you got for us?
Yes, we're on to sustainability here, in particular Scope 3 emissions, and how certain sectors are not moving forward as quickly on Scope 3 emissions as other sectors, notably retail. And I spoke to Simon Geel, who's Executive Vice President of Procurement and Supply Chain Consultants, Proxima. And Simon was explaining how in retail, because it's such a fiercely competitive sector by definition, there isn't much collaboration between companies on how they approach tackling Scope 3 emissions, so that in manufacturing or in other sectors, companies are beginning to share best practice, and they're being, quite collegiate about this. But that's not really happening in retail. And he mentioned two sort of US retail colossi, but big retail companies, Walmart and Costco. And Walmart is actually incentivizing its suppliers to be more sustainable. It's working with suppliers who have a high rating with EcoVadis, the organization that helps businesses measure sustainability, both in-house and third-party sustainability, and it's offering them favorable terms if they have a good rating. Costco, on the other hand, isn't really doing very much at all on that front, and even though its investors has asked it to do more, Costco's approach is to say, we don't really have much control over our suppliers, I'm afraid. And Simon Geel makes the point that in retail, for things to really start moving on Scope 3 emissions, it's gonna come down to customer pressure. It's when they start getting hit in the pocket, when customers start looking at companies like Costco and vote with their wallets and vote with their feet because they're not doing enough on sustainability, then they'll start moving. So I thought that was an interesting comparison between retail and other sectors.
It is interesting, and anyone who attended our sustainability event last week will know that supply chain and Scope 3 emissions were really high on the agenda. So many really fascinating sessions from speakers talking about this particular topic. Yeah, you can watch some of those sessions on demand, I believe, as well. So check out our sustainability magazine website as well, because there are lots of supply chain and procurement content on there. Now, yeah, we are going to have a look at some comments now, because we have had some people saying hello from all over the world. Kieran, you can try and keep up here, but just feel free to flick through some. We've got people joining us from Dubai. We've got people joining from Mexico, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Rome, Jakarta, Atlanta, Brazil, Ghana, and many more places. So truly international audience. Thank you all for coming and joining us today, and for saying hello as well. But now let's move on from supply chain to procurement. And Georgia, what news are you going to highlight for us this week?
Yeah, so this week I came across some interesting insights from the management consulting firm Bain & Company. They were looking at how procurement leaders can be successful in 2022. The insights highlighted that those who are simply buying better this year will find that it won't be enough to navigate the year ahead. So instead, some more sort of complex goals such as supply chain risk mitigation and resiliency, strengthening strategic partnerships, transparency, and also supporting nearshore initiatives will sort of differentiate those that will be successful this year and those that won't.
Okay. Yeah, I always enjoy reading Bain and Company's insights, actually, I have to say. And so, yeah, you can go and check out, more from Bain and Company on that story there on the website. And Georgia, I've got time for one more story from you, I think, before we go to the ad break. What else have you got for us?
Yeah, so there was another interesting piece. It was from last week. It came from the meat supplier industry. So a recent study from Investor Network Fair Initiative found that 63% of big meat, fish and dairy suppliers are actually failing when it comes to preventing diseases such as COVID-19, which we've all just experienced. The company said that with 3 out of 4 new diseases today being ones that cross over from animals to humans, that it's going to be important for suppliers to be responsible, by disclosing information on their conditions and practices and making any necessary changes.
Yeah, I suppose this goes back to something that Sean was talking about as well. I suppose talking about transparency in the supply chain as well. It's not just about scope 3 emissions; it's about everything else in the value chain and in the supply chain as well. Okay, so some really interesting stuff there. If we can just bring up the ticker for the websites again, as I said, if you want to catch any of the content that we've been covering there, you can visit supplychaindigital.com and procurementmag.com as well. And you can find all of our news, insight, features, and our latest magazines as well. So do go ahead there. Okay, now we're going to take a quick break now. And after that, we'll be back with our very special guest and more news about the live event, which is coming up in, only about 7 weeks' time. So we'll see you after the break.
I don't think you could go to a boardroom today without having somebody bring up the topic of supply chain management. My name is Jonathan Kohlhauer. I am the Global Supply Chain Practice Lead at UST. UST is a global IT services provider. We have 30,000 employees and we serve our clients in 129 countries. We help companies with their supply chain problems by listening carefully, understanding their problems, and then carefully working through the problem solving to identify the best resolution. One of the things that's quite important for UST is our partnerships. Partners bring a level of expertise and a level of understanding that in some cases we just don't have. And we find that by combining those partners with our solutions and our thinking, that we're able to deliver the best outcome for our client. The difference between UST and its competitors when it comes to supply chain management consulting, we bring a complete solution. We begin with a strategy, we move into the process, onto the technology, and fully into the support mode as well. We're the only ones that can do that.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I just realised that's the interview with Jonathan that I did this month. I've done a few interviews with the executives from UST. If you aren't familiar with the work and what they do and how they help people solve the toughest digital transformation problems, then go and check them out. Really worth knowing about, and massive company that you might not have heard about, and that's something that they describe themselves as well. Okay, now we're going to have a look at the results of our poll later, and about the biggest threats that are facing supply chain. And we've also got some highlights from the new March issues of Supply Chain and Procurement magazines. But first, Sean, I think you have our special guest.
Yes, I do, Scott. Really happy to welcome Dawn Tiura, who's the president and CEO of the Sourcing Industry Group, SIG. It's one of the largest global associations for sourcing, procurement, and risk professionals. So welcome aboard, Dawn. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So wonder if I could open up, maybe, Dawn, by just inviting you to talk a little bit about SIG. What is it you do, and who do you serve?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we serve primarily the Global 1,000 companies. So everyone that is in SIG typically has over $1 billion of spend under management. And we represent all industries. A lot of highly regulated industries participate with SIG. So we do spend a lot of time on third-party risk and regulators and issues like that. A huge focus on ESG, and that's really taken over more than sustainability now in the United States as the scoring mechanism. So that's truly our focus. So unlike supply chain, we focus on the upfront sourcing and outsourcing and third-party risk and the sourcing mechanisms. We don't spend any time on logistics, warehousing, distribution.
And I know that you provide thought leadership and also training services to your members. Mm-hmm. I'd be interested to know, I mean, is what you're offering on that front, has that changed drastically in the last 2 years? I'm kind of guessing it has.
It has. Third-party risk, as you know, and Georgia is especially procurement by themselves could literally destroy a company if they go in and they source with the wrong company that has, whether it be human trafficking or money laundering, all kinds of things that could take a company down, and especially cyber. So third-party risk has really been put on top of procurement as a focus. So that's been a huge change in the last few years, especially because of the supply chain disruptions. So we do focus a lot, and we have a certification on third-party risk management. And then we also teach modern sourcing. So, today's sourcing professional needs to have soft skills, they have to have hard skills, and they have to have deep sourcing expertise. And it's very different than someone who was a buyer 20 years ago. So we teach certified sourcing professional. And so the first third is all about the hard skills that you may or may not have remembered from college. The middle part is taught by Kate Vitasic, who is world renowned on sourcing and sourcing models. And then the last third are all the soft skills that you need as well. And we also teach, you have to understand AI, RPA, sustainability, so many other aspects around sourcing these days.
Sure. And then just for a little bit of clarification, is there any difference between sourcing and procurement?
Oh, absolutely. Procurement for most people is the transactional side of the house. It's the repetitive buys. It's buying off of a commodity list, where sourcing says that I'm going to rationalize my supply chain. I'm going to go very, very deep into total cost of ownership, maybe some should costing. I'm going to carefully vet these suppliers. It's not a P-card type purchase. We're typically talking about multi-year, multi-million-dollar type of agreements. So it's a really cool methodology where you really go deep into your suppliers, and you also bring in stakeholder groups in order to make the correct decision for your organization.
And I don't know, you probably hear this a lot. I certainly do, and I know Georgia does too. When we speak to senior procurement people, they nearly always say that the pandemic has actually been quite good for this particular function, because pre-pandemic, often procurement didn't have the ear of the C-suiters, but that post-pandemic, it has. What's changed?
Well, the biggest focus has been, we have some superheroes that came out of the pandemic, truly, for them to be pivoting on a dime and sourcing things that they'd never sourced before, that were never they didn't even have commodity codes for PPE for most of these companies, or testing kits and things like that. We also have one of the world's largest testing organizations, and there was a worldwide shortage of cotton swabs that you need for these tests. So they went out and innovatively worked with suppliers to use bamboo instead of the normal cardboard sticks that are on cotton swabs, and found new sources of cotton, and literally created a manufacturing organization to create bamboo stick cotton swabs. That all came out of procurement. And it was their innovative touch where they knew they needed it for this testing organization to be able to, it's a diagnostic company that's worldwide. And so those are the type of superheroes that came out of the pandemic. PPE suddenly became a direct material to these companies, and they had never bought it before. So and everybody knows the word sourcing, don't they, these days?
Well, yeah.
And everyone knows supply chain.
And exactly. I was just going to say the same thing. And I guess in some ways this is because procurement people are so plugged into third-party suppliers, aren't they? And and on that same note, because they're so plugged into suppliers, and because they decide who any company spends its money with. I mean, does that really make procurement, the in the front line of the quest for ESG compliance and sustainability best practice, probably more than any other function in a business?
Yeah. So, Sean, I'm a former CPA, so similar to chartered accountants for you. And so I was really surprised by the meteoric rise of the CFO, because being in procurement, we see everything. And it's the only other view of the company that is across the entire company. So we see the stupidity, the redundancy, the waste, and we can change it real time. And so that's why so many of us are in love with sourcing and procurement. And so, yeah, we are the pivot point for ESG, sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can drive all of that, and for the good of our shareholders, or for the amount of risk our company wants to take, we can mitigate risk before it happens. We can identify risk events. We can introduce safety measures into our supply chain. And, unfortunately, Sean, the one thing that we don't do well is understand. We know who our first tier suppliers are. We don't have really good visibility into second and third tier. And that's where we have to go as a profession.
And how do you resolve that problem, Dawn?
Technology. You can't do it without technology. And I don't know how it is for you, but we can identify a lot of food sources right down to where a crop was grown, right down to a field. We know where coffee is grown, right down to the acreage of plants. We don't do that in manufacturing. So we know componentry, we know what we buy from the first tier, but we don't go all the way down to the raw materials and trace it. And that's really where we have to go as an industry to really drive sustainability.
Yeah. So one challenge at a time, I guess. But Dawn, thank you very much for your time. It's been a real pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, really great. Thanks for that, Dawn. Really good to have you on the show. I love the fact you called the procurement executives the superheroes. I hear that time and time again at the moment, and not just from procurement professionals, it has to be said. Procurement is clearly a rapidly evolving function in today's businesses, as change of all kinds continues to dominate our lives. So thanks again, Dawn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn.
Okay, so moving on, let's turn our attention to the brand new magazines. So, Sean, why don't you talk us through first one of your highlights from the new March issue of Supply Chain?
Yes, sure, Scott. Be delighted to. So, one of the highlights from the March issue. I don't know if we can see it on screen at all.
I'm sure we will do, mate. You carry on.
Okay. But one of the highlights for me was a feature I did on the changing nature of supply itself. It's quite a seismic thing, really, because for 40 years or so, the nature of supply has been linear. That's why we call it supply chain. And the term supply chain was actually coined by a British logistician, Keith Oliver, in an interview with the FT back in the 1980s. And I think the reason that it embedded in the sort of collective consciousness was because back then, nobody was connected to anything. I mean, you didn't have any internet, you didn't have mobile phones. The closest you got to, connectivity was when you got a cross line on your phone. So it was amazing, I think, to people to think that the world was actually connected in this way, that you had businesses and people who were interconnected across the world. But now, of course, connectivity is normality. And with the pandemic, it's taken connectivity in a whole new direction. So which is away from chains and towards networks. So in particular, with the move to omnichannel in retail again, we've seen that with retail now embracing omnichannel being just the seamless consumer experience across e-commerce and in-store. With that all being so seamless now, the companies are having to source products from all over the place in really smart digital ways. And I spoke to Maria Ray Marston, who's head of global supply chain innovation at Accenture. And it was Maria who actually coined the term demand response networks, just like Keith Oliver did with supply chain back in the 1980s. So I don't know if in 5 years' time we're going to have to change the title of the magazine to Demand Response Networks Digital, how we're going to fit that on. But maybe we can cross that bridge when we come to it. But as Maria describes it, a demand response network is a network of companies and points of delivery comprised of smart suppliers, plants, transportation companies, as well as intelligent locations for placing products. So all that super quick, micro fulfillment in the last mile. And she said, but it's not just the retail thing, although it's more obvious that it's happening in retail. She said it's happening across all sectors. And she gave energy as an example. She said, if you think of an oil company with its oil fields and drilling platforms and refineries, all that infrastructure requires services. She said, well, there's your demand. That's a demand response network in a different shape. So it is quite a profound change for supply. Just the nature of it itself, it's changing shape. So I thought that was fascinating.
It does sound fascinating, and just to clarify, we will not be changing supply chain digital. We will just launch demand response networks digital, Sean, as a sister title to sit alongside that. But now that is interesting, and also, the point you make there about retail. It's not all about retail, but quite often these innovations or transformations, whatever we want to call them, do seem to emerge from retail, and especially in the last couple of years, like you say, with the omni-channel and everything else. I think it's just changed the public's expectations when it comes to customer service, delivery instantaneously. So it's this instant gratification almost that obviously then impacts everything else down the supply chain as well. So I think retail is if you like, the consumer-facing interface. But that's why it's impacting and toppling all of those proverbial dominoes, if you like, that impact all the supply chains as well down the route. Okay, that sounds really interesting. I'm going to go away after this show and read that one, actually. And you spoke to, it was Maria
Ray Marston.
Okay,
yes.
Brilliant. All right. I'll definitely go and check that out. Now, Georgia, can you top that? What have you got from Procurement magazine that's going to make me want to dash away and read it straight away?
Yeah, so a top pick for me in this month's issue is one where I spoke to Jagger's Vice President of Product Management, Amen Redshimi. In the piece, we discussed the technology advancements in contract lifecycle management, alongside sort of the risks that are associated with it and how people in procurement can navigate them. The feature, it really highlighted the importance of data and AI within contract lifecycle management, but then also the sort of cyber risks that can come with using technologies like that and how you can sort of mitigate those risks. But yeah, an interesting quote from Amen, which actually sort of echoes a bit of what Dawn was talking about earlier, is that he said, with effective CLM, organizations can ensure that remaining on top of that they can remain on top of important data, but how effectively an organization manages its contracts ultimately determines the effectiveness of their procurement strategy, of their risk management, and their revenue performance.
Yeah, well, absolutely. As you said, it does echo what Dawn was talking about as well. And, technology, that's something that Dawn mentioned that I am going to pick up on again here. Technology is what is going to drive this change and really make the difference in terms of having the visibility, the transparency, really getting to grips with those third-party suppliers and scope-free emissions and everything else. So technology, you've got a lot on your shoulders as we move into 2022. Okay, let's move on then. Now just pick up a few more comments and hellos from the people who are joining us today. We have Maloko from Botswana. Hello, Maloko. Thanks for joining us. I also saw we had Mohammed Tamimi from it doesn't say where it's from, actually, from Salam Telecom. I assumed that was in Dubai, but I'm not quite sure. But thank you for joining us today. And we've got users joining us from Singapore and Trinidad, all the top places around the world today. Okay, now let's have a look at the poll. Now, I think the poll has now closed. So, Sean, why don't you remind us what the question was that we asked? And let's have a drum roll and give everybody the result.
Right. So we asked our viewers, followers, readers, what do you think is the greatest single threat facing supply chain today? And the results are top with 55%. Geopolitical uncertainty. I think we all know why that is. Labor shortages, 20%. Inflation, 16%. And the COVID-19 pandemic, 8%. I mean, inflation and labor shortages really are a product of the pandemic. So in some senses, you can roll those into one, I guess, even though labor shortages were, a reality even before the pandemic. But yeah, I mean, people are feeling very uncertain at the moment, with just cause, and businesses in particular.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, as you said, I don't want to go too much into the results of this. I think it's all pretty clear. It would have been interesting to see how this poll might have fared, 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'm sure we probably would have had a slightly different result. I think
you would have done.
Yeah, I think events have taken everyone a little bit by surprise. So yeah, we hope for a successful and peaceful resolution to everything that's happening in the world. Okay, well, thank you for voting in the poll, those that did. We do appreciate you taking part. But we're going to move on. And finally, as they say on all good news shows, just a reminder that coming up, we've got our Procurement and Supply Chain live event taking place in London. Now, this has been dubbed the Risk and Resilience Conference, and that's going to be back at Tobacco Dock on the 27th and 28th of April. And you can join us at the venue or as a virtual attendee. And in case you missed last year's inaugural event, here's a quick video of what you missed.
Good morning and welcome to the first day of the inaugural Procurement and Supply Chain Live.
It's wonderful to be here today just to share a little bit of our journey within Vodafone.
Suppliers were just outstanding. They were rock stars, without a doubt.
Everything can be supplied at very short notice now in all of these regions.
An honor to be a speaker here at the Supply Chain Live conference.
It's been a great audience. It's been some really fantastic speakers.
It's just great to be out and about meeting people face to face.
It's great to see real people in 3D and to be able to have that exchange of ideas.
The interaction, the networking, the relationships you can build has been phenomenal, and through Chest and Trace we can carry on doing more of this.
Before that, we had something which is wonderful, and you must all try it. It's absolutely fantastic, called PowerPoint.
There you go. And as it said, to be continued. And those dates are, again, 27th and 28th of April. So around about 7 weeks away. And last year's event was fantastic. This year's event is going to be off the scale compared to that. So please do sign up. We've got loads of speakers already lined up, some great sessions, some great content over 2 days. If you have, if you're interested in risk and resilience and in particular relating to supply chain and procurement, then that is the place to be for 2 days in London, or indeed join us online. Now, sadly, that's all we've got time for today. Been a really interesting show. Thank you, guys. And thank you for joining us for the Supply Chain Digital Show. Thanks also to our special guest, Dawn Tayora of Sourcing Industry Group, to Sean and Georgia for joining us today, for Kieran and the video team, and of course, Kaylee and Catherine from the marketing team in the background, and to everyone who's taken part in our poll and said hello today. So quick hellos. We've got Heather from Washington, Tilek from Boston, Samuel from Panama, and Imran from the UAE. Truly, we are an international, and we thank you. See you next time. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.